their hearing. However, even if you are not at those extremes, again, please make no mistake. The excess of noise most people are exposed to today can and does have some very negative effects. Multiple studies have been done on this, and first and foremost, the noise most certainly escalates our stress levels and keeps them escalated. Now, we're naturally programmed, if you will, to feel calm and comfortable amidst everyday natural sounds like gentle breezes, trees rustling, water flowing, and birds chirping. However, all these excessive, unnatural, and cacophonous sounds, the bleeps and dings from phones, the roar of engines, and so forth, activates our fight or flight mode, our sympathetic mode, and it keeps this tense sympathetic mode activated. And that is not good at all for your health or your mood or your longevity. A constant elevated level of stress is strongly linked to chronic inflammation and many of the most serious diseases out there. And indeed, noise pollution has been linked to heart problems, gut problems, brain and concentration issues, sleep problems, of course, anxiety and depression, and hearing issues as well. So, what do I do to reduce this form of toxin, noise pollution? Well, first of all, remember that as much silence or only natural sounds as possible at night is golden. In our house, for this reason, and the potential hazards of EMFs too, we shut down the phones and other electronics at night and locate them far from where we sleep. We use heavier sound-absorbing curtains and close them at night. And a little tip, using pillows made of clean, safe fabrics that you place strategically throughout your bedroom can be great for absorbing and reducing noise, such as traffic and other sounds coming in from the outside. Now, meanwhile, during the day, I make sure to take mini vacations, so to speak, from the noise. In my case, I've got a room in the home with no windows at all that is by far the quietest room in the house. And I will leave all electronics behind and several times a day head there to do breath work, meditation, or simply to rest in the relative silence. Now, I also routinely bathe my ears and brain in the sounds of nature to get away from all the constant unnatural noises. And if you can't do that because it's noisy outside where you live, there are now apps and sound machines, videos, still CDs out there and so forth that provide natural sounds that you can play inside your home, such as babbling brooks and ocean waves and things of that nature. And a bubbling indoor water fountain, for that matter, whether it's a large one or a small one, is also a really good investment for this inside the home. My bottom line advice on this is to be conscious of this noise pollution and create a sacred, silent as can be area in your home, or an area where you can drown out all the cacophony out there with natural sounds, whether that's inside or outside, and do the same thing several times a day. Do your meditation, breath work, positive reading, or simply your resting in that sacred sound space. And if you're unable to do that because where you live is especially noisy, for example, you can invest in sound canceling headphones or put quality headphones on of any sort and listen to those natural sounds available on a wide variety of apps. The point is, in a hearing sense, you need to detox on a daily basis too. So please don't neglect this little known yet very important area. And okay then, I promised you a terribly good day from your experience, from your area of expertise. Can you please share 3 to 5 of the most important steps that you personally take to look and feel your best now, to avoid and possibly even overcome disease and live long doing it? Dr. Mills, what would a first step be?
Sure. Well, the most important and most fundamental step any person, any human being can take to ensure the best overall health, the lowest risk for disease, and the longest, most functional lifespan would be to become completely plant based in their diet. And that is to eliminate all animal foods from their diet because there is no question that human beings are natural herbivores. We are not omnivores. We really are plant eaters. And there's well over 100 years of accumulated medical and scientific research that shows that the closer we come to a fully plant based diet, the healthier we are, the longer we live, the lower our risk for disease and dementia, and the more functional we remain throughout our lifespan. There's a very famous book that was written by researchers who called the Blue Zones, and they looked at the areas around the world where people lived the longest and were the healthiest to try and figure out what was it about the people living in these areas that conferred these long, healthy lives on these individuals. You know, what did they have in common? And what's important about that data is that, you know, if you only look at one population, some people might say, well, maybe those people are just genetically programmed to live longer, or maybe it's something about that particular environment that helps them live to great age and protects them from disease. But by looking at different ethnic groups from different areas in the world, you overcome those arguments. You've got a mix of genes, you've got a mix of environments, but when you still see people in these different areas and backgrounds and environments living again to extended ages and again having a reduced risk or incidence of many of the chronic diseases that are prominent in Western countries, then that suggests that there are some factors at play that you can tease out and help people adopt so that they can take advantage of those protective factors. And the one major factor that was consistent across all of the blue zones was a diet that was largely or entirely made up of plant foods.
Mm-hmm.
And even within the blue zone populations themselves, what they found was that the more closely the diet adhered to a purely plant-based diet, the longer the people lived and the healthier they were. And in fact, the longest lived population amongst the blue zone groups were the people living in Loma Linda, California, which happens to be the only blue zone identified within the United States. And the people they looked at in Loma Linda were either vegetarian or vegan. That is, they eliminated 90 to 100% of all animal foods from their diet. Some of the vegetarians did use a little bit of dairy products or eggs in their diet, but for the most part, the closer people came to a fully plant-based diet, the longer they lived, the healthier they were. And again, the plant-based population in Loma Linda were the longest living of the entire Blue Zone group. So that is without question my number one recommendation to people, that if you want to live a long and healthy life and maximally reduce your risk for chronic disease, dementia, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, and so forth, you have to eliminate animal foods from your diet because they are the ones that promote the chronic diseases we see. They increase inflammation and oxidation within the body, which again drives all of these diseases and ages the body. So that's the absolute key. And I purposely said that the population in Loma Linda is the only blue zone that has been identified in the United States because there may, in fact, be a second blue zone in the United States located in Huntsville, Alabama. And what's interesting about all of this is that Loma Linda, California is made up of largely Seventh-day Adventists. That's where the big Seventh-day Adventist medical university is located, and most of the people who live in that area are Seventh-day Adventists. And what's, again, key about that demographic is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church encourages its members to become plant-based because the Bible teaches that that was the original diet that God designed us to eat and told us to eat. Right up
Hmm.
front,
Hmm.
Genesis 1:29, he said, be plant-based. Well, the majority of the people living in Loma Linda are white Seventh-day Adventists. And it turns out that early in the church's history, the church established a HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama. HBCU stand for Historically Black College or University. And they established a Black university for, at that time, freed slaves and African Americans to obtain higher education called Oakwood University. And
Hmm.
as a result, there's a very large population of Black Seventh-day Adventists who live in the Huntsville area. And we're coming to learn that there's a very large number of them who also live into their 90s and hundreds and
Hmm.
remain active and functional. And so right now there is an effort underway to document that and catalog it and get the research done to actually confirm that, in fact, we do have a second, what I guess you would call a Black blue zone in the Huntsville area. But the bottom line is that the NIH has been helping to fund two long-term studies on Seventh-day Adventists called Adventist Health Study 1, Adventist Health Study 2 for the last 30 plus years. And there were some findings from Adventist Health Study 2 were released within the last 2 years that showed that the healthiest people within the United States are Black Seventh-day Adventist vegans, in fact.
Wow.
So the data, again, is just really consistent across the board that being plant-based lowers your risk for disease, maximizes your lifespan, and keeps you functional throughout your life.
Hmm. Well, listen, first of all, it's fascinating regarding the folks in Huntsville, Alabama. And boy, I'm going to be sure to follow that more closely and look deep into that. The bigger point is that this one, now actually multiple studies you're talking about regarding blue zones, indeed does point to the fact that the more plant-based, the healthier and the longer lived you are. And everyone listening, those are not the only studies, by the way. I think you mentioned over 100. There are so many studies that suggest that. Also, studies that specifically note that it's especially important the older you get to eat plant-based, right?
Yes, there's no question that that's true because what many people don't understand is that our risk for developing chronic disease, but especially cancers, increases the longer we live. In fact, the majority of cancers occur in people who are 65 years of age or older. But eating a lot of animal protein markedly increases your risk for developing cancer. So, again, by having and adhering to a plant-based diet, you will again markedly reduce your chances of developing cancers as you age. So yes, it's even more important as we get older because it helps reduce the risk for all chronic diseases, especially cancer, but also heart disease, diabetes, and so forth. And it reduces the kinds of oxidative stress that just living itself places on our bodies so that we don't age as fast. I always tell my patients and the audiences that I speak to that we all have two ages that are important. One is, of course, our chronological age. But what's even more important than your chronological age is your biological age. And your biological age is determined by the oxidative stressors that you have incurred throughout your lifetime. We're going to incur oxidative stress just as a function of living, but those stressors can be mitigated by the foods that we eat on a regular basis. If we're eating high oxidation, pro inflammatory foods like animal foods, fat, saturated fat, and so forth, those things are going to accelerate aging. On the other hand, if we're eating plant based foods that are high in antioxidants, phytochemicals, and other nutrients and compounds that counteract aging, that decrease inflammation, we actually lower our biological age. And really interestingly, We've known for years that at the end of all of our DNA strands or chromosomes, there are these little stretches of DNA called telomeres. And each time a cell divides, the telomeres get a little bit shorter. However, there is an enzyme in a cell called telomerase that can actually make the telomeres longer. Well, this is important because once the telomeres in a particular cell get shortened to a certain point, that cell will die. Even before it gets to the point where it will end up experiencing cell death, as the telomeres get shorter and shorter, the cell becomes more susceptible to disease. So anything that will lengthen telomeres will make the cell more resistant to disease and cause it to live longer. Well, Dr. Dean Ornish, in a study that was published in the British journal The Lancet, showed that by putting people on a plant-based diet, he could increase the activity of their telomerase enzyme, the enzyme that lengthens the telomeres, from 30 to 80% by putting them on an entirely plant-based diet. So there again, you have scientific proof that being on a plant-based diet helps reverse and protect you against the ravages and effects of aging and will help you live longer and more healthfully.
So well said, Dr. Mills. And yes, the research overwhelmingly confirms all that you're saying. And I will go out on a limb here and say that right now we have very few people listening who are in their 20s. If you are in your 20s and listening, I sincerely applaud you for having the foresight to take control of your health and longevity, by the way. But I bring up the 20s because if someone is in their 20s and eating lots of meat, they will not typically experience the effects of it for quite some time. However, for those in their 30s, certainly those in their 40s, and very certainly those in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, you will feel the impacts of it in short and sometimes very short order. On the flip side, if you drastically reduce your meat intake or cut it out altogether, you will also very likely feel the positive impacts quite quickly too. By cutting the high oxidation and pro-inflammatory meat and instead incorporating more of the nutrient-dense, phytochemical-rich, fiber-rich plants, you will feel better in the now, and you're certainly setting yourself up to live much longer while feeling better. If you have any doubt about this, by the way, try it. Try to go entirely plant-based for a few weeks and pay close attention to how you feel in a few weeks, not to mention how you look. This is really as essential gets, Dr. Mills, so thank you.
Let me also say that I want to be clear that just because someone is in their 20s, they shouldn't feel like they have the ability to play chicken on the railroad tracks.
They certainly don't.
Because the fact is that even though they may not notice the effects of these oxidizing and inflammatory compounds that are circulating in their body, those compounds are still doing damage to their proteins, to their DNA, that are setting them up for disease later in life. Chronic disease is a result of cumulative damage that occurs over a lifetime. You can look at the skin of someone who has been plant-based for 10 or 20 years and compare it to someone who hasn't been, and the differences are immediate in terms of the fact that they are less likely to have wrinkles or age spots, that their skin still has this thickness and elasticity. I try to tell patients all the time, stop watching those oil of Olay commercials. They're a crock of nonsense. It's like if that stuff really worked, they would go get a 90-year-old woman, slather that crap all over her, and have her come out looking like Christy Turlington or someone. And so the point is, we want to start preserving our health as early as possible, because that's what's going to help you live the longest and live the healthiest. You don't want to try and wait until you start seeing the effects of the damage, before you start making change. Now, having said that, it's never too late to start. And our bodies have a remarkable ability to heal themselves, but it's like any machine. You can buy a new car, if you take care of that car from the get go, it's going to last a whole lot longer than if you run it into the ground for 10 years and then start taking care of it. Yeah, it'll do better than if you never take care of it, but it'll do best if you take care of it from the get go.
Absolutely. Listen, we're not only on the same page, we're on the same paragraph on the same page.
There you go.
And if you are in your 20s and you're listening, post a commentary at the bottom of this page because it's exciting to have you here as well. You must have the foresight to know that you're going to get some good insights that if you put in the play today, it's going to make a monumental difference in your life today and well into the future. Most people listening here, late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond that as well. And Dr. Mills noted the good news that it's never too late. Any change you make on this front, adopting more and more and more and fully a plant-based diet, you're going to notice it. You're going to notice it in your skin. You're going to notice it in your energy. And you're certainly going to notice it in the length of years that you add to your life. Well, maybe you won't be able to see that, but you'll be living long enough to say, hey, that probably made quite a big difference. So what a fantastic first answer here. Let me move things along and ask you, Dr. Mills, if you don't mind, what is another of the most important steps you personally take to live long and live well?
Sure. Well, it's something that people, I think, frequently tend to think of as a benign part of our diet, and it's really not. I'm thinking of fiber, but you can't talk about fiber without also considering our microbiome, which is the population of bacteria that lives within our colon. One of the ways that I like to try and help people understand just how important the colon and the microbiome is to talk about the concept of food retention time. Because, for years, people thought the colon was just a big storage organ for stool, and it just that's where the stool hung out until we got rid of it. And that's, in fact, not at all what should be going on in our colon. So when I talk about food retention time, what I'm referring to is the amount of time a meal stays within the human body. Clearly, many people have digestive issues where they aren't very regular, and some people, sadly, tragically, horrifically, can go a day or two without having a bowel movement. And let me be very clear, that's abnormal. That is not normal. That is unhealthy. And that's the kind of bowel habits that put you at high risk for a whole slew of health problems, including colon cancer, diverticulosis, diverticulitis, and so forth. But everyone should be having at least one bowel movement every day. Now, if a person is eating a good high fiber diet, you are highly likely to have a bowel movement certainly once a day and maybe even twice a day. But again, the question is, what is an appropriate food retention time? How long should a meal stay in your body? Well, I think a reasonable food retention time is about 14 to 16 hours. Now, I get asked this question a lot. People say, well, look, Dr. Mills, how am I supposed to know how long a meal has been inside my body? Everything looks the same when it comes out. Right? And I'm like, okay, I grant you that. So this is what we're going to do. The next time you eat some whole kernel corn, you look at your watch when you eat it, and you look at your watch when you see it again. You can do the same thing if you eat something like really deeply colored, like beets that are really purple. Or I find the same thing if I eat something like spinach or collard greens that are super dark green. You can tell when they've made their reappearance. And again, the average time is about 14 to 16 hours. So we'll stay towards the low end. We'll say 14 hours. The question is, where is it during those 14 hours? Well, as it happens, if you're eating a healthy meal that does not have a lot of fat in it, a meal will stay in your stomach about 2 hours. And the stomach's job is just to churn it up, turn it into liquid, and pass it into the small intestine. Now, if the meal is very greasy, has a lot of fat, that takes longer for the stomach to process, and it can stay in your stomach up to 3 hours, maybe a little more. But that's when people start to have problems with acid reflux and GERD and dyspepsia. And it's really not comfortable to have something sit in your stomach that long. So typically, though, a meal will be in the stomach for about 2 hours. Then it passes from the stomach into the small intestine. And most of us have about 30 feet of small intestine. Taller people will have somewhat longer small intestine, but we're going to use 30 feet as an average. And you would think, wow, 30 feet, it's going to take forever to pass through that. No, actually, the meal passes through the small intestine in less than 2 hours.
Wow.
So we've got 2 hours in the stomach. We'll just say 2 hours in the small intestine for neatness sake. That means that if we're using a 14-hour window for food retention time for a meal, that means the meal is spending the majority of its time in the large intestine. And the question is why? Why is it spending all that time in the large intestine? And the reason it's there is so that the bacteria in the large intestine can ideally work on the leftover fiber that we should have eaten to break it down into a number of really important compounds that can affect our physiology in very positive ways. And it also turns out that the bacteria in the microbiome can modify plant compounds like phytoestrogens, lignans, lectins, and so forth, so that they actually become very powerful anti-cancer fighting compounds, and their substances in cruciferous vegetables such as
Sulforaphane.
thank you, that these bacteria will activate. And then those compounds interact with our immune cells to turbocharge them so that they can then go out and fight off disease and so forth. But that's assuming you have the right type of bacteria in your microbiome. And when I say fiber, I'm not talking about bran cereal. I'm not talking about FiberCon. I'm not talking about any of the artificial nonsense that you buy at the store. I'm talking about the whole plant fiber you get when you eat whole plants. You know, when you eat whole grains, when you eat beans, green leafy vegetables, root vegetables, all of those plants have fiber as part of their cellular structure that we don't have enzymes as mammals that break down fiber, but bacteria do. And when that fiber is passed into our large intestine, the bacteria go to work and start breaking down that fiber into all of these really important compounds. And one of the most important families that they break them down to are things called short chain fatty acids. And there are three principal short chain fatty acids that have really potent and powerful impacts on our physiology. The first is a 4-carbon short chain fatty acid called butyrate. Butyrate is of critical importance because the colon cells themselves like to utilize butyrate for their energy metabolism. So the cells in your colon do not like trying to extract energy from your bloodstream, unlike the other cells in your body. They prefer to get their energy and nutrition from the breakdown of fiber products by the bacteria. And what that means is that if you don't have enough fiber in your diet, you will not have enough butyrate, and your colon cells won't be healthy, they won't be happy, and as a result, they aren't able to maintain tight junctions, and you start to get leakage of bacteria and bacterial antigen in between these cells, and that is what's called leaky gut, and that can lead to a whole host of inflammatory problems and so forth. But if you have a lot of plant fiber in your diet, you will have a very healthy colon. You'll have a lot of butyrate. Now, the second short chain fatty acid is 3 carbons long. It's called propionate. And that's really the powerhouse short chain fatty acid because propionate acts just like the diabetic medication glucophage or metformin. It stops the liver from making too much glucose and helps our body control its blood sugar. But it does something even more powerful. It inhibits an enzyme called HMA-CoA reductase. That's the target enzyme that statin drugs like Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor, and so forth are designed to target. Well, again, when you have enough fiber in your diet, the short chain fatty acid propionate will inhibit that same enzyme and do exactly for you what these statin drugs will do without the potential side effects of the statin drugs.
Wow.
And that's why we see that when people go on a completely plant based diet, their cholesterol levels will drop by 100 to 120 points. Again, because suddenly they now have their microbiome making these really powerful biologically active substances that are doing great things for them. But propionate also increases the level of the good cholesterol HDL, which protects us against heart disease, and it helps control triglyceride levels. And then finally, there's a 2-carbon short chain fatty acid called acetate, which when it's absorbed, it's used by our muscle cells instead of glucose or blood sugar. And what that means is that the sugar that we have stored in our muscles and in our liver lasts longer, so we don't get hungry as often, so we don't eat as much, and we don't gain as much weight. It also turns out that propionate helps decrease hunger as well. So the whole plant fiber just does amazing things when we have a diet that is made up of whole plant foods. But if we're not eating whole plants, we're eating instead processed carbohydrates like white sugar, white flour, white rice, white bread, and things that have had the fiber taken out of them, then we don't get the benefits of whole plant fiber, and our colon is not happy. There's just a lot of inflammation in our system, and we're much more subject to not only disease, but depression. Because another thing our microbiome does for us is that it manufactures neurotransmitters that actually are taken up by the central nervous system and help decrease the risk for things like depression, anxiety, and mood and behavior disorder. And again, research has shown consistently that when people go on a plant-based diet, their risk and prevalence of depression decreases markedly. But without it, you actually get structural changes in the white matter of the central nervous system that correlate with anxiety and depression disorders. So fiber is not something that is optional. It is something that is absolutely essential for our good health. And when I say fiber, I don't mean the 20 or 30 grams that is typically recommended for Americans. That is just way too low. To really be healthy, we need to be consuming on a daily basis 50 to 100 grams of fiber every single day. And that may sound like a lot to Americans, but people in other places in the world that eat a more plant-centered diet get at least 100 to 120 grams of fiber every day because they're eating whole plant foods. And it's very easy to do by consuming a plant-centered, plant-based diet.
Well, first of all, Dr. Mills, wow, what a crystal clear explanation of the key reasons that one of your personal most important steps of all is to get enough fiber from whole plant-based foods each day. It's not just to maintain regular bowel habits and eliminate wastes from the body, including toxins, everyone listening. 50 to 100 grams of fiber from plant foods daily is simply mission critical for your colon health, to avoid leaky gut, to control blood sugar, achieve healthy cholesterol levels, manage appetite and weight, and even help decrease the risk for anxiety and depression. And just a few examples of some of the highest fiber plant foods that come to mind, by the way, are artichokes, collard greens, acorn and butternut squash, nuts such as almonds, legumes such as lentils and chickpeas, and seeds such as sunflower seeds and chia seeds. Chia seeds are really sky high in fiber. And while we're on this topic, Dr. Mills, let me ask you something important regarding probiotics. Now, everyone listening, there are around 100 trillion bacteria inside your body, in your gut, and some of them are good and helpful to you. Those are typically called probiotics, and some of the bacteria are not good. And unfortunately, Due to environmental and lifestyle factors that are common today, such as bad diets and the overuse of antibiotic drugs, many, if not most people, are severely deficient in the good bacteria that help you in many ways, including crowding out and eliminating the bad bacteria, and in ways Dr. Mills just described. So, Dr. Mills, you hear a lot about different ways to replenish these probiotics, these good bacteria in our body. But is the best way also simply consuming more fibrous plant-based foods?
It really is because, whenever we discover something new about our health, there's always companies that want to rush out and create products to sell people and make people think, well, you can't be healthy unless you buy this product. And that is really a bunch of nonsense because as we've discovered and come to realize the importance of the microbiome, there are companies now that are selling people probiotics, which are actual bacterial cultures that are contained in a variety of different foods, yogurt, other foods, with the idea being that, oh, if you eat these probiotics, then that's going to give you the right type of bacteria for your microbiome so that you'll be healthy. But what studies have shown over and over is that when people ingest these probiotics, they will establish a population of the bacterial cultures in the probiotics transiently for maybe 24 to 48 hours. But eventually, because the colon operates like a throughput system, those cultures are washed out. And if the person isn't taking them all the time, they don't stay there. What has been shown to be much more effective at establishing a healthy permanent residence of good bacteria are ingesting the types of fiber that the good bacteria like to feed on. It's kind of like, feeding pigeons or puppies. If you give them the food that they eat, they hang around. And likewise, by eating a nice mixed variety of whole plant foods, that is really what's necessary to select for the best and healthiest types of bacteria. And that's what really helps them remain established in our colons. And again, I really want to stress to people that every single type of plant has, just like all people are different, all plants are different. And they all have slightly different types of fiber. They have a different complement of water soluble to water insoluble fiber. And the greater the variety of plants you're eating, the healthier your microbiome will be. And so it's really important to get legume fiber, which tends to be stiffer than other fiber. It's important to get fiber from grains like wheat, oats, corn, quinoa, even some exotic ones like sorghum and so forth. And then softer fibers, hemicelluloses that you find in your green leafy vegetables. There's a lot of water soluble fiber in vegetables like okra and carrots and sweet potatoes, root vegetables, and fresh fruits. And again, the greater the variety of those foods that you eat, the greater the variety of fibers you will be ingesting and the healthier your microbiome will be.
That is as important as it gets, everyone listening. Let me sum that one up for you. So, a lot of people's microbiomes are unbalanced, not enough good bacteria in there due to bad habits, due to bad diets, due to excessive antibiotics, and all kinds of other factors going on. The best way, and also the nice thing is the most cost effective way, is to eat a lot of different plant-based foods that's going to feed the good bacteria in your body, to put it in a real nutshell. And it's going to allow them to expand. It's going to allow them to crowd out and snuff out and do whatever they do to the bad bacteria inside your body. So microbiome is super important, as Dr. Mills very clearly explained here, for your overall health, your longevity, fighting disease, different cancers, and so on and so forth. So really appreciate it.
Let me interject one other thing. The other really important factor that affects the health of a person's microbiome, particularly in Western countries, is the fact that many of us are eating too much animal protein and animal fat. And the type of bacteria that you select for when you have a diet that is very heavy in animal protein or meat and dairy products and animal fat, those bacteria don't ferment fiber. They actually putrefy or rot the leftover animal protein and animal fat. And they're much more likely to create toxic metabolites. And it's very easy to tell if you have those bacteria by simply taking the whiff test. If when someone uses the bathroom, you need a hazmat suit to go in after them, that tells you that there's a lot of toxicity there. Whereas I'm not going to tell you that if you're plant based, it's going to smell like a flower shop, but it is much less smelly, much less offensive. And that's because you're not creating all of these toxic compounds like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, cresol, and so forth that are created when you've got putrefaction of bile acids, animal protein, and animal fat that occurs on a meat-based diet. And those compounds are also toxic to the good guys that you really want to keep around in your microbiome. So it's really important to severely limit or best to eliminate those components from your diet so that you can select for and really promote the healthy types of bacteria in your colon.
And that is a crystal clear presentation of why. I really appreciate that. Listen, we're getting down to the wire here, so I'm going to ask you, even if you want to combo a couple of answers in one, I do welcome that. But how about one more most important step you personally take to live long and well, Dr. Mills?
I'd be remiss if I did not mention the importance of regular exercise. And by regular, I mean a minimum of 3 to 4 times a week, at least 30 to 40 minutes continuous. It is important to do both aerobic and anaerobic, anaerobic being resistance type exercise. Having said that, people need to understand that you cannot out exercise a bad diet. Okay. And I always remind people to think about Jim Fixx. Jim Fixx was the guy who started Runner's Magazine. He was famous for running all over the place, and he ran himself right into a heart attack. Because if you're eating grease and cholesterol, you are still clogging up your arteries, and running just makes it circulate through your system faster. So exercise is important, but it cannot undo the effects of a toxic, destructive diet on your body, your cells, and your arteries. And if somebody came to you, put a gun in your hand, and said you got to choose either a good diet or exercise, definitely a good diet will keep you alive longer. But it's obviously best to do both. Also, I just have to tell people, I show people a picture. I show them a picture of an elephant, a rhinoceros, and a cow. And I ask, what is the natural diet for those animals? And everybody says plants, of course. And so I say, okay, at what point in these animals' lives do they eat animal protein? And 2/3 of the audience always says never. And I say, think about it. And then people start to say, oh my goodness, when they're nursing. And I'm like, exactly right. When they're drinking their mother's milk. Mammalian milk is filled with animal protein. Mm-hmm. But what that means is that for a plant-based animal, animal protein is a growth signal. And that's why adult plant-based mammals should not be ingesting animal protein, because it is interpreted by our bodies as a signal to try and grow. And it's going to cause our bodies to start to develop tumors. And many of those tumors will be benign tumors like lipomas, moles, skin tags, cysts in the uterus or prostate the size of New Jersey. But a lot of those tumors are frankly cancerous. And there's a very important study conducted over an 18-year period with 6,300 participants who were 45 years of age or older. And it showed that the people with the highest animal protein intake had a 4-fold increase in cancer incidence, and they were 75% more likely to die prematurely. So this is no joke. We should not be ingesting animal protein as adults. It is toxic to our system. It will promote cancer. It also promotes heart disease, hardening of our arteries, diabetes, and other metabolic disturbances. And there's at least one person who's going to listen to this and say, but man, I can't live without. And I remind everybody, nobody asked for fried chicken, ice cream, or pork chop in the delivery room. We were all born without preferences. Everything we think we like, somebody taught us to like. And just like you had an old girlfriend or boyfriend that you thought you could live without until they did something stupid and you kicked them to the curb, you can kick a bad diet to the curb and learn to love something else that's actually good for you. Once you love it, and you don't miss what you had before. And that's what I'm going to encourage people to do.
Well, wow. Oh man, the passion, but also the experience behind that. I'm almost speechless here. I mean, first of all, I'm standing ovation for the delivery of that. But second of all, remember that phrase, everybody, a couple in there, you cannot out exercise a bad diet. That's true. He explained clearly why and what an image you painted. We don't want to grow when we're already grown because it takes the body in ways that you don't want it to go, the tumors and so forth. So, wow, what a powerful picture. Listen, Dr. Mills, this has been a fascinating and truly useful discussion. And truth is, I could probably chat with you for another hour or two or three, maybe, because you are a fountain of insight on how to live long and how to live well. Unfortunately, my friend, we have to close down here. So first, I do want to encourage everyone to go to Dr. Milton Mills, plantbasednation.com. That's